the most welcome and important cry in the world, the first cry of a newborn baby. Some say it is the baby's cry of protest at finding itself outside the security of its mother's body, where it has been protected and nourished for 9 months. Others point out that it may be caused by complicated biochemical changes. Whatever the mechanism that nature has devised to set off that first breath and cry, the fact is that the newborn's life is literally dependent on it. Perhaps this is why nature makes it so easy for babies to cry. These sounds of babies you are about to hear are startling perhaps at first. There are sounds of cries, noises, squeals, gurgles, and just plain racket. They are normal sounds that parents must adjust to at all hours of the day and night. It is because they are not dangerous sounds. But unless you are prepared to some extent for the infant's noises, you may feel that every whimper, squeak, or yelp needs your or your physician's immediate attention. Remember, long before there were physicians, there were babies making pretty much these same sounds. Like bicycle riding or swimming, once you have learned them, you will never forget them. Because the cry is virtually the only method of communicating the baby has during the first months of life, it is logical to assume that the baby will cry several times during each day and for varying periods each day. The infant cries because it needs to be fed, to have its diaper changed, to be burped, or sometimes just to be held and loved. Of course, the baby may be crying simply because there's nothing going on. Here are some examples of healthy babies' cries in the first few months. That was a lovely blonde one-day-old girl. That was an 8-pound, 4-day-old male fussing in Spanish. There was a healthy 3-week-old female infant who objected primarily to being undressed on the examining table. Sometimes her cry was vigorous. Sometimes she was simply fussing. A few general thoughts about crying are probably worth mentioning. Infants don't harm themselves by crying. If they're destined to have a hernia, or a rupture as it is often called, they'll have it. The fact that they're going to have a hernia was almost certainly determined by heredity. If you know that a young, otherwise healthy infant is not hungry, that is, that he's eaten well and not too long ago, and that his pants are clean and dry, and that a reasonable effort was made to extract a burp from him, and of course that he doesn't have a pin sticking in him, it is probably most realistic, though difficult, to regard his screaming as noisy exercise. That was a healthy 5-week-old infant singing her own lullaby. That was a healthy 18-month-old female infant whose mother's chief complaint is that the youngster cries, quote, all the time at home, unquote. The mother then modifies this statement to the effect that the child cries whenever she wants anything. As she was put on the table, she began to cry, and did so most efficiently. She shut her eyes, put her arms out flat, and struggled not at all. She cried so efficiently that she never even became short of breath. When she decided that she had cried enough, she stopped and was not even panting. As you may have noticed, her crying disturbed her slightly older sister not at all. That was a smart 16-month-old male who had polished up the preceding performance to a point where he could drive his mother crazy with it. This really is a very ingenious production. It has the monotony of the whine, the melody of the song, and the quality of a cry. And what about the toddlers when you see the cut, the bump, or the fall that makes them cry so vigorously? What is the kindest, most loving reaction that you can show them? I hope that you will briefly tell them and show them how sorry you are that they hurt. But I also hope that you will spend most of the time assuring them that they are all right and will be all right. This is why they bring their cries to you, for assurance. And when they get only pity, they are frightened. And finally, with ever-learning toddlers, instead of rewarding their inevitable missteps and mistakes with cookies and candy, simply point out in words that they can understand why the injury occurred. This way, they will learn not to repeat the action that led to the injury. Sweets as rewards for injury invite more injury. A simple explanation of why the hurt happened is true immunization against a similar accident. After the very earliest weeks of life, there follow many months when infants are delighted to get vocal or tactile attention from anybody who has the time to spend with them. Between 8 and 12 or 15 months of age, the majority of youngsters, in their growing awareness of what's new, begin to be suspicious of strange voices, faces, and hands if they approach too closely. Their suspicions change to outright howls of protest if the strangers do not respect their feelings. Doctors and knowing nurses expect this reaction and look upon the ensuing crying and struggling as very normal developmental response. But think of what these same reactions can do to the ears and egos of visiting grandparents and great aunts. That was a healthy 9-month-old male infant. Do you think that was a pretty good performance? I think she did it from an old script. But listen to this ad lib. That was the cry of a healthy 14.5-months-old female infant. Well, as an infant or a young child has a minor infection and feels even slightly bad, several things happen. He doesn't know why he feels differently than he usually does, but he certainly wants someone to give him some reassurance and comfort. Never having heard of the stiff upper lip theory of behavior, he will, in his lack of inhibition and comprehension, let his entire environment know that things are not right. He will moan, groan, whine, scream, bellow, or whimper, whichever seems appropriate to him to transmit his news bulletin. Thus, no matter the degree of noise, The mildly uncomfortable infant is only protesting because he doesn't feel as terribly great as he usually does. That was a lovely 20-month-old female infant who came in because of a stuffy nose and a nighttime cough. When a cry is a response to an obviously unpleasant sensation, such as fatigue, pain, hunger, specific physical discomfort, or loneliness, the cure is obvious and highly effective. But many cries of infants must, after elimination of obvious causes, be looked upon just as noisy exercise. Perhaps some of these cries are due to the excitement and handling of yesterday's visiting relatives. Maybe a few are due to gastronomic overindulgence. And it is always possible that for good reasons, mother's tender hands have been a little tense all day long. Without making a definitive diagnosis, there is always one more great cure. That is, allowing the infant the dignity of a good, solid, prolonged cry and the solace of a little solitude. Up to now, you've heard numerous cries of assorted shapes and sizes. So far, you haven't heard any wonder cures for those cries. Now listen to a 5-week-old girl in what apparently is agony. Once you know what her problem is, and then hear the attendant noises, you will realize that there is no direct ratio between sound and suffering. Here is the most commonly recurring crisis in the life of young infants: hunger, stark hunger. But notice how quickly that was cured, and how equally loud the sounds of satisfying that hunger were. No nice young lady should belch, but wasn't that a remarkably satisfying burp to both baby and bystanders? Now listen to this 6-week-old girl finishing a feeding and being patted a few times to get that rewarding sound. The burp may not always come this quickly, but once you hear it, you and the baby will be relieved. Unlike the belch, which is often satisfying and can be controlled, adults find that hiccups are not only painful socially, but oftentimes physically as well. Not so with infants. Hiccuping 20 to 40 times a minute, their bodies shaken with each spasm, they don't seem to be bothered at all. In fact, at 4 to 6 weeks of age, they will smile through an hour-long series of these small explosions. That was a healthy 6-week-old female infant, happy, smiling, and hiccuping. Infants don't know that society expects them to have at least one bowel movement a day. They also don't know that whether they have one or not is their own private business. Therefore, they are apt to announce each bowel movement, whether soft or hard, by a magnificent assortment of grunts, cries, and even screams. It should, in all honesty, be mentioned that the loudness of their sounds bears no regular relationship to the consistency of their stools. Here is a healthy 5-month-old male infant announcing the normal production of a bowel movement. Babies immediately know how to cry. Somewhere between 3 and 4 months of age, they learn how to laugh. Between these two extremes of sound, they soon learn to fill in with other noises. Here are some of these early experiments in vocalizing. That was a healthy 4-month-old male infant, testing and tuning up his vocal machinery. That was a very happy 4-month-old male infant, reveling in his vocal experiments. That was a healthy 5.5-months-old male infant practicing to be a politician. That was a healthy, husky, 19-pound, 6-month-old male commenting on the state of the nursery. There was a most enchanting 20-month-old healthy young lady who, in spite of the fact that she had a considerable vocabulary of individual words, at the moment was simply experimenting in sounds. One of the first non-crying sounds that the human infant makes is a rather humming as breath is expelled through the partly closed lips. Later this is developed until it finally becomes mum, mum, mum. Similarly, quite early the tongue is clicked from behind the front teeth or upper gum to produce dit, 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 which finally is transformed to waiting receptive ears of parents into da-da, da-da. It is interesting to consider in how many languages the infantile words for mother and father are slight variations of the foregoing. I firmly believe that these two words, in a multitude of languages, were determined by the parents' interpretations of the infant's early experimental sounds. Some early sounds are semi-accidental. At 3 to 5 months of age, when a baby begins to salivate, or when at about the same age he gets his first cold and coughs, he may decide that this is a great sound, and he will thereafter, for a short experimental period, drive his parents to distraction by practicing his cough. And so it goes. One way or another, the infant happens on the production of a given sound. Not content, he practices it, gives it variations, and then, in effect, waits for the time he wants to mimic adults or older children in their vocalizations. Then from his memory bank he pulls out these polished sounds, puts them together, and becomes the pride of his parents. A word of caution, if I may. Present the infant with a wealth of speech example, but do not pressure him to use it. Enjoy, revel in, and encourage your child's attempts to communicate with you, but don't exploit those attempts as one of his social graces. At 4 to 6 weeks of age, infants start to respond to pleasant human sounds by smiling. Soon in this pleasure, and their wish to participate in this phase of communication, they are gooing and eyeing. By 5 months of age, their efforts are apt to be quite sophisticated and very effective. From this age on, vocalizing, joyful and otherwise, is a continuing experiment. Those were some assorted and enchanting sounds from a healthy 4-month-old male infant. Now, there was pure joy, uninhibited. That was the laughter of a happy 7-month-old female infant. It is impossible to record the headache, the stomachache, and the fever. The cries that might accompany these complaints are not distinctive enough from the skinned knee or the bump nose to be able to distinguish them. The sounds of coughs and snuffles can be recorded, and while not necessarily diagnostic, are perhaps worth listening to. That was a little snuffling and a little fussing and a light juicy cough in a 9-month-old female infant who had a mild cold. That That was a dry, useless cough in a 3.5-year-old boy. It could very well be the cough at the start of measles. That was a 5-year-old girl who has been coughing for 3 weeks. Her cough is occasionally sufficiently severe to make her vomit. This cough arises as a result of an allergic reaction in her nose and upper air passages with the production of extra mucus. In this instance, the cough is actually protecting the lungs by bringing up the mucus which is dripped into the lower air passages. Following such a cough, most children then swallow the mucus. We've been brainwashed about coughs. First, there are the forthright ads. Stop that cough. Then there are the innuendos. If you don't stop that cough, it will turn into something worse. Naturally, then, parents are worried about coughs in young children. But no cough ever turned into something worse. Understandably, if a cough is caused by a piece of peanut in one of the air passages, and if this is not discovered, the piece of peanut will damage the lung, but not the cough. There is a cough which is caused by throat irritation, which is wearing and accomplishes no good purpose. This cough can be helped with ordinary throat lozenges, the time-honored milk and honey, or even codeine if need be. Allergic children are coughers. They cough more and harder and longer, with all the things that make other children cough. Cough and tuberculosis used to be synonymous. Now, thanks to the virtual conquest of tuberculosis, cough and allergy are. However, much more commonly, the cough in children, usually worse at night and the first thing in the morning, is caused by secretions dripping down into the air passages from the nose and throat. This causes the usual so-called chest cough, and parents say they can feel the rattles in their youngster's chest, or the cough comes all the way up from their toes. Do you want to stop this terrible cough? This is the protective cough that keeps your child from having real lung trouble, such as true congestion or pneumonia. Give him enough codeine to stop this cough, and you may endanger the child. This cough is pure protection for your child's lungs. The mucus and pus that is dripped down into the air passages from the nose and throat is by this wonderfully protective cough coughed up and then swallowed. This may not sound appetizing, but it is a highly effective protective device of nature. And there are added dividends. The swallowed mucoproteins are digested, absorbed, and reused. And any swallowed bacteria may act as an oral vaccine against some of those same bacteria in the future. So, and most importantly, when secretions drip down from the nose and throat into the air passages of the lungs, we welcome that deep, chesty cough as an ally. And proper cough medicines are formulated not to stop it, but to make it easier and less disturbing to cough. When the drip stops, so too will the cough. Many new parents, when they go to bed for their segment of the night, are so exhausted that a baby must really exert himself to make his wants known. On the other hand, large numbers of parents feel that they must use their ears or electronic devices to hear every sound the baby makes during the night. And what they hear can be startling and most disturbing. Since the baby has not learned to tell time by the clock or the calendar, his activity, vocal and otherwise, is unconcerned with the artificial divisions of day and night. What this newcomer to the family doesn't realize is that when the sun and sound levels go down outside, he is not competing with extraneous noises, and so with no intent to disturb, he frequently does. These are some of the sounds in the night. That was a well 3-month-old female infant who weighed only 8.5 pounds because she'd been a premature baby. The sounds were those she made as she was awakening from a sleep. That was a very healthy 5.5-month-old baby boy, vocalizing and making happy sounds to himself in his crib during the middle of the night. There was a healthy 5-month-old girl saluting the opposition. One of the most common and frightening noises that parents of young children hear is no noise. In the early morning hours, the noise that silence makes grows louder and louder with each passing second. Listen. That was 15 seconds, 1/4 of a minute, of no noise. Is it any wonder that after hours of listening to babies' snuffles, snorts, sighs, and rasps, that such a little bit of silence can drive parents leaping from their warm beds to see if baby is all right? We're going into a delivery room now and present the entire birth sequence. While the parent seldom hears his infant's first cry, it is this sound that means life to the newborn baby. The voices are those of the attending physician and nurse. The sucking sound is the mucus being extracted from the baby's mouth by means of a syringe to clear the way for breathing and that vital cry.
Now the anterior shoulder is delivering. The posterior, and the baby has given a very slight cry.
While the sounds that babies make continue to become more meaningful and unique until the individual personality emerges, there are always new babies making their entrance into the world. And each of these, no matter what his race, color, or creed, emerges into life with just about the same amount of vocal skill and ability that every other baby has.